Okay, hi guys. This broadcast is as much a surprise to me as I'm sure it will be to you, because I had never really intended to look at Finland's chart, and I had no idea that it would prove rather interesting. So Finland have elections on the Sunday, actually, the 14th of April. So I thought we'd have a look and see what's going to happen. So first of all, I've got here Finland's chart. Just a little bit of a snapshot there to give you an idea. So Finland is Sagittarian. They were formed on the 6th of December, 1917, and they managed to break away from Russia at that time to establish their own country. So I'm going to do a little bit of a Brexit segue, a very brief one, because there is something we can take out of Finland's chart that's rather positive for the UK. Right, but just to tell you, it's a Sagittarian. They've got Gemini rising with Jupiter rising in Gemini, Pluto in the 2nd house, Venus in the 10th house, Uranus in the 11th house, Sun obviously in the 7th house because it's a Sagittarian, Mercury conjunct the node in the 8th. And also notably, Moon conjunct Mars in Virgo. So why do I say it's significant and a little bit similar to Brexit? Well, have a think about this. Of all countries that are next door to Russia or to the Soviet Union, they all were at one time under communism, weren't they? Only if you go right the way to sort of China, which is also obviously under communism, and Mongolia. Every other country from Belarus, Ukraine, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, all these countries that are next door to Russia were always absorbed into the Soviet Union, into the kind of bigger bigger ambitions of Russia. Yet Finland managed to escape from Russia, and it stayed free. And it stayed free despite the fact that after 1917, when Finland got its independence and broke away from Russia, there was a pro-Bolshevik party within Finland trying desperately to take it back into Russia. So I think that's kind of similar to Brexit. We want to break away from the EU. We've got a big political faction within us that want to keep us into it. But Finland has remained, as you know, an independent country. And even in the 30s, when there was a Finno-Russia war, Russia managed to fight them. Finland managed to fight them off, and it's managed to stay an independent country despite being so close to Russia, or to the Soviet Union in the days of the Cold War. Now, why Finland is very important? It's the EU's only major border with Russia. Yes, there's Kaliningrad, which has a small border with Poland, but Finland, that's the longest border that the EU have with Russia, because otherwise they're buffered by Belarus and Ukraine. So it puts Finland in quite an interesting position. So what did I feel that the Finland chart had to say? Well, I think before I come to that, I might mention something. Was a famous astrologer who wrote a lot of books called Linda Goodman. So some of her books go beyond just astrology, and she talks a lot about metaphysical subjects and very interesting subjects like that. And what she always said is there's a rule that the country to the north will always prevail over the country to the south of it if it's in the northern hemisphere. And one of the examples she gives is because Helsinki is north of Moscow is the reason why Finland have always, well, throughout the last century for at least, been able to thwart Russia and move away from Russia. So she said the only the exceptions to that rule are where America broke away from the United Kingdom in terms of being a colony, and when sort of Mexico broke away from Spain in terms of being colonies. She said when it's wars of independence, it's different. But in other wars, the country with a capital to the north always prevails. So the UK was able to prevail in World War II. Throughout the history, Spain never managed to conquer the UK, etc. So it's quite interesting. Is London just to the north of Brussels? Yes, I think it is. So seems that we might prevail. So let's look again at Finland. So as I say, Gemini rising with Jupiter rising in Gemini. So because Jupiter is rising, this is a plucky country. They've got a lot of luck going their way. And we can see that because it's both a prosperous country. For example, they feature top in economic performance, in education, which it would be because they've got Gemini rising, they've got Mercury on North Node. So they're a country which has a great education system. They're doing well in terms of that. In terms of economic competition, they rank well. In terms of press freedom, stability, and of course in the World Happiness Index. They all rate very well, and you wouldn't think so. coming from a hot climate as I do, I always perceive that warmer countries are happier than these cold countries where it's dark so long. And yet Finland constantly ranks high on these happiness indexes. So maybe it's all to do with this Jupiter rising. Now, with Pluto being in its second house, I do feel that there are vast untapped resources, either of coal or other precious minerals. So that's something that maybe they haven't explored fully in Finland. Being a Sagittarius, I think that's kind of appropriate as well, because we talked about countries that have a strong Sagittarian influence, like Canada and Australia, because they're such vast countries with wilderness. And while Finland is not that vast, it is a fair-sized country, but so much of it is unpopulated. It's vast. It's forested. It's quite undiscovered, and that fits into the Sagittarian theme. So with Venus in the 10th house, Finland is a country that's had to fight for its rights, fight for its independence, had to go through wars. And very often Venus, which seems counterintuitive, but it is, Venus is associated with war. And so it has had to kind of fight its way. Now, Finland's also a member of NATO. They're a member of the UN, they're OECD. It seems quite important to them to belong to these organizations. So with the Sun being in the 7th house, similar to France, I think it's very important for Finland to have a very strong relationship with the EU, especially as they always feel threatened by Russia and being reabsorbed there. So I think their strong relationship with the EU is going to continue, and we'll see that through some of the transits that are taking place. So in the 50s, there was a treaty between Finland and Russia, and they had to pay reparations to Russia or the Soviet Union. And this is what encouraged Finland to very radically industrialize, because post the 50s, they were a really agricultural nation, fishing and things like that. They weren't highly industrialized, but they were forced to become industrialized in order to pay these reparations to the Soviet Union. And they did this incredibly effectively, which I think is partly due to them having Uranus in Aquarius, which makes them a very adaptable nation. And it was during this time that they adopted the Nordic welfare state model. So because they have the planets Moon and Mars in Virgo in the 6th house, I feel that's why they're very strong on kind of workers' rights, welfare state, because the 6th house is the house of the welfare state. With their Moon conjunct Mars, I feel they are quite a feisty bunch, the Finns. Yes, they are involved in adventure sports, skiing and motor racing. I feel they're quite feisty and quite ready to fight for their rights. And like I say, yes, they have a welfare state. They're quite looked after in that way, and it's a fairly a stable kind of country where where people are well looked after. So I'm just thinking of what I wanted to say. Let's see. In terms of the character of Finnish people, they are known as being very open, sincere, warm, hospitable, quite introverted. There's a joke that apparently says if there's an introverted Finn, he looks at his shoes when he's talking to you. An extroverted Finn looks at your shoes when he's talking to you. So quite an hi Stein, Aaron, hi, hello. And so I think that captures the Moon in Virgo, which is very sort of self-contained, modest yet persevering nature of the country. But with Gemini rising, it shows the kind of the curiosity, the openness, the hospitality of them. They're also a very talkative, but Moon in Virgo, self-depreciating nation. So what about the politics? Well, politics in Finland has been quite stable over the last sort of 100 years. Yes, that's right. Finland has Moon in Virgo conjunct Mars. Shows that the character of people being quite precise, having attention for detail, being quite intellectual, yes, and it's probably why the country industrialized so quickly, because similar to there's that theme in Northern Europe, isn't there, that sort of technical, the expertise, hardworking, attention to detail, high productivity. That's very much Moon in Virgo conjunct Mars, which sets Finland out as being one of these, kind of highly productive clinical nations. So in terms of the political parties, there are the Centre Party, who's kind of a conservative but socially liberal agrarian party, which are interested in non-centralization. They get a lot of support in the rural areas. There's the pro-EU Liberal Conservative Party, and there's also the Social Democrats, who are very pro-EU. So in the sort of 50s, there was a large force of the Communist Party that kind of died away, and since then it's been, like I say, the Centre Party, the Liberals and the Social Democrats who've dominated politics. So they have a proportional representation. So they're very rare. Well, I don't think they've ever really had one party. It's always a coalition. And it's usually a coalition of one of those I mentioned with a smaller party. However, things started to change in their politics in 2011. The Finns party came to the fore and they won 30-odd seats. So they came from almost nothing to getting a very high percentage, maybe about 14, 15, 16% of the vote, which meant they went into coalition with the Centre Party and one of the others to form quite a big centre-right party, which is what we have at the moment. The Finns party is more pro-nationalist. Let's see, they are anti-EU, and they are what we would see more as a populist, not so much populist in a bad way, but a pro-nationalist anti-EU party. They've been growing increasingly in support, which is no surprise because this is on the trend of what's been going on in the whole of Europe. But this Finns party had a bit of a split 2 years ago. There was a certain section of them didn't agree with the new leader that was elected, so they broke off. So the smaller section that broke off has stuck with the centre-right coalition, and the rest of the Finns party has gone their own way. So with looking at elections coming up, I'd just like to mention some of the polling. The party that's in the lead is one of the Social Democrat Party, who's a pro-EU, more socialist party, more of a centre-left party. They're leading with 19% of the vote. The Finns party have radically increased in the polls in the last week or two, and they've now got up to 16.3% of the vote. And the other parties, the other two centre-right parties, are polling at between 14 and 15.9%. So there's been a consistent lead of the Social Democratic pro-EU party, who could perhaps form an alliance with the Green Party, who also pro-EU, obviously. So, because the Green Party have also one of the other parties that have recently become a lot more prominent. They've got about 12.2% of the vote. So when I looked at the chart, the midheaven for Finland is exactly on 20 degrees of Capricorn, which is exactly where Pluto is transiting right now, as you'll know from a lot of my broadcasts where we've talked about the UK chart. So what does that mean? That means there's going to be quite a change in terms of their politics. And I'm thinking, since the centre-right coalition have been in government, I'm thinking, hi, hungry, how do I find my moon? There's lots of, if you look up online, calculate my natal chart, just putting those words to Google, it'll send you to a program where you can put in your birth date, and it's preferable to know your time, and it'll tell you where your moon sign is. Okay, so in terms of what's going on in the chart of Finland, I think there's going to be a change. I think it'll be a shift from the centre-right, and I think they're going to go to a socialist party, probably the Social Democrats in conjunction with the Greens, because one of the other things that are being triggered in this chart is Moon Mars in the 6th house. Now, the 6th house is the house of the worker, very symbolic of socialism, workers' rights. So it seems to indicate to me that a party who puts workers' rights and unions and things like that at the center, and also is very focused on the welfare state, is going to come into power. What I also see from the progressions is that, well, Jupiter on the ascendant says to me open borders. And I'm seeing that that progression is being, that Jupiter conjunct to the ascendant is being triggered by solar arc. Therefore, I think this new party is going to be an open borders party, and it's going to speed on both the integration of Finland into the EU and the kind of mass immigration, which is unfortunate for a lot of people, of course, who watch my channel, because most people would be, say, supporting parties like the Finns party, who are more pro-nationalist and interested in like a Finland first policy. So while I do think the Finns party is going to do very well, I see that it's going to be hard for them to form a coalition, to form a government, because the largest party, which it looks like is going to be the Social Democrat Party, will have the first opportunity to form a government. So I think Finland is going to be joining with France and Germany now quite strongly in consolidating this European project. So instead of moving away, I think Finland will be moving closer. I also see something happening with the military, and I see that Finland has had a policy of neutrality, which is perfectly acceptable with this ascendant in Gemini, because that would be neutrality, right? But I think they could be willing to move away from this a bit. And because they have the strategic position as being the only country in Europe with this very long border with Russia, I can see some involvement with maybe an EU army, maybe even with NATO, maybe we're having some missiles or something like that stationed in their country, which could up the ante with Russia. So that's the kind of thing that I think could be happening with Finland. So I think Finland could be about to move one step further into the EU, into the whole globalism. I think Finland is about to go through some fundamental changes as indicated by Pluto going over that midheaven, except I think in Finland's case, it's going to be more integration, you know, something that really will change the shape of their society and could actually impact very strongly on their welfare state, which of course with Mars, Moon conjunct Mars representing the people and the anger could trigger a lot of resentment within the people. So on one hand, we have nationalist parties like the Finns party getting a lot more popular, but they haven't done enough yet to seize control and put the brakes on, whereas other parties who want to press forward on the agenda still have a lot of power. So I'm going to be watching the Finnish elections to see what goes on with the parties, and I think it could, like I say, be a more center-left coalition that gets in there. But an interesting chart with Finland, and interesting for us as Brexiteers to watch, because as a smallish country, they did manage to hold off the Soviet Union despite internal pressures, and that's a good message for us that, you know, whatever happens, we might be able to. Stein, I'm interested to see you in Hungary. Hope you'll, you know, comment on one of my vlogs and update us with what you feel about Orban and what you feel about how things are going on in your country, because I might look at Hungary's chart at the moment. Thanks, guys.